All righty. How's everybody doing out there? Hope you're doing well. Josh, good to see you again.
Good to see you too, David.
It's exciting. It's exciting times for the drone industry. And we're going to hop on here as two of the Lewin brothers to bring to you guys a couple news items and events happening this week or next week. And we'd love to share some exciting news as well coming up here at the end. I do want to shout out to our flight crew members who help make this podcast possible. Andrew Bowen, working on some incredible projects with digital twins. He always says TAC is the way. I agree. And he's a UAV pilot. And then, of course, Eb Nadler, who is the king of TAC all across the board. So reach out to these guys and show them some love. With that said, welcome to another live edition of This Week in Drones, Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern. And of course, you recognize Josh, my brother, who runs his own show on Tuesdays. And with that, we will dive right in. As folks are coming in, we are live. So as always, say hi, send us some love. And if you have any questions or comments while we are live here, please feel free to engage and we will banter back and forth with you. Makes a lot more fun and lively for all of us as well. So with that said, we will dive right in here. So earlier this week, in terms of news and events, I was able to participate in a panel at the North Carolina Drone Con with Basil Yap and J.K. Stoltz from both AeroX and then, of course, J.K. with Skydio. And we talked about Part 108. And it was really interesting because a lot of the folks in the room, and of course, you guys hear us talking about Part 108 here quite extensively on the podcast, as the deadline is October 6th for submitting those comments. Make sure you do so. So just a quick sliver on that, and we'll get to some other topics here. But I just wanted to mention what I learned there that came up during that discussion. And the first item that really jumped out at me is there is a short reference in the way that the NPRM is currently written. There's a short reference to like civil service, which we imagine is like law enforcement, where they might be included. And of course, it's very short and sweet. It's really related to just disaster recovery and more like specific missions that come up versus like 911 dispatch that we see today with DFR programs is 24/7. They're just sending drones. If they get a call, they're sending it out immediately. There's not a pre-planned flight. And that's what it looks like today. However, this proposed rule seems to limit that, to just like, hey, you have to submit this in advance and it has to be a specific flight path. And it's only during disasters and other similar events, search and rescue, things like that. Well, it came out during this panel that actually the civil service line or section actually only refers to contracted groups that are providing UAS operations for a city or for a state. It actually doesn't refer to the in-house city or state, say law enforcement that have their drones. So it's even one more step removed than I even realized, where law enforcement truly is not represented at all in the current Part 108 draft. So just keep that in mind. Again, go read it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. But I thought that really jumped out at me as a point of, an area that needs a little bit more expansion. And with that said, the second thing I'll bring up, and then we'll move into some other news items, including some airports getting shut down because of drones here on Monday. If you didn't hear about that, Josh is going to hit that here in a second. But related, also one other item in this BVLOS NPRM that I wanted to highlight is it currently requires ground-based detect and avoid, thus something like radars, for Class B and Class C airports, and also for Category 5 population areas where there's lots of people, like big cities. And there's some pushback that I'm hearing, some dialogue around, is that necessary to include a ground-based DAA system in those particular areas where there's ADS-B out from airplanes and there's other mitigations to make sure that there aren't crashes. And so do we need to include, say, radars, at these Class B, C, and C airports? And one thing that's not really being talked about is the counter UAS side of that, where there may be a reason that the FAA built that in, because it's not only the Part 108, it's not only to enable drones, but there's a bit of a security element built into those 750 something pages as well. And we're having an uptick in drones flying at airports after the DJI removed their geofence. More and more people are flying in protected airspace where they should not be in the path of airplanes, and it's getting harder and harder to get in front of that. And so we need that, ATC modernization to be able to see everything, not just big airliners and maybe Cessnas. We need to be able to see everything aloft, as our good friend DJ Smith has always taught us. That we really need to have awareness of everything in the air. So to land the plane, on my point here is, I think it's a good thing that this NPRM includes that requirement for ground-based DA at Class B and Class C airports and Category 5 population, because you're going to get both with a high-resolution radar at that range needed, say 5 miles off of each each direction off an airport. You're going to get your deconfliction so that your drone doesn't hit a manned aircraft, but you're also going to get the benefit of seeing all of the drones in that low altitude and protect people. So with that, I'll get off my soapbox. Josh, if you have any comments off of what I just shared, feel free to interject those. But then otherwise, then bring us up to date on a real world scenario that just happened on Monday of what I just described at an airport. But yeah, take it away.
Yeah, I was going to say another situation, not just drones, but also helicopters, because I don't know if you all remember when that helicopter ran into the passenger plane near DC, but a lot of times helicopters aren't always broadcasting right when they take off and land. There can be some lag time between that. So having that low level altitude detection really makes everybody safer, especially when you might have emergency response or military sites where they could have helicopters coming up and down. It makes everybody safer when you have that low level detection. But going back to what David said, are you going to share the article, David, or did you want to just go over it?
Yeah, let me find that.
Just to describe it for you guys while David's pulling it up. So in Denmark a few days ago, starting on the September 22nd and going through the 25th, there were multiple airports across Denmark that were targeted by drones. They had different airports would have, a couple hours at one airport, a few hours at another airport. I believe in all they had up to maybe 6 airports that were shut down for various amounts of time across the country. And they're not exactly sure who was behind it. There's some talk that maybe it was some foreign adversaries who were trying to disrupt our air traffic, but really just goes to show you that it's very easy for people to do coordinated attacks across large spaces like Denmark. The whole country had 6 airports being targeted, so it is a real concern. And the other thing is, likely this was a coordinated attack, but there is a chance that maybe they just got a couple pieces of drone detection equipment installed and started noticing the drones as well. So without having a little bit more detail on what capabilities they currently have to detect drones, they might have just been hobbyists who've been flying around those airports for some time, and they just potentially were made aware of it. So I do know that they were talking about getting some more drone detection, and also they even said mitigation technology. So I guess in Denmark they're able to shoot down drones a little bit easier than we are here in the States. But it's a real concern for folks. And the idea too is that a lot of these sites might already have drones around, but the more they roll out that detection equipment, the more likely it is that they're going to see drones flying around. And some of them, like I said earlier, might have just been hobbyists, and they could have just rolled out 6 or 7 sites of detection and all of a sudden realize that they have drones around. So it really just shows you that, until you really have layer detection to know what's in your airspace, it's going to be hard to, really manage what's going on and know if it is a threat or if it's just hobbyists flying around. And it makes me wonder, because if they saw all these drones, it's likely that they were flying, drones emitting a signal. And you would think if these were drones that are trying to, carry out some attack, they probably would have been flying dark, maybe, tethered or flying, with waypoints. So I'm just speculating. I don't really know much more than what's been reported in the news, but it just is interesting because you saw a kind of similar thing in New Jersey where they got some detection equipment and all of a sudden everybody's starting to see drones because they were there the whole time. It's just they were made aware of them. So I'm kind of curious to see if maybe something like that was happening in Denmark, or if maybe was truly maybe they had physical sightings of the drones at the airports and were able to really see they were flying over their landing pads and trying to disrupt it purposely. So it's really interesting. It'll be, I don't know if David, you have any comments, but I think one thing that this really highlights is that people think the only way to the only like worthwhile reason for having drone detection is for mitigation. But the reality is that the more you're aware of your airspace, the more you can deter people from violating it. So, these guys, let's just pretend that these were hobbyists flying it. They could have sent out police and seen that they were there. And over time, as people who fly drones in the area know that they're going to get police coming around sniffing to see what they're doing, it's going to deter people from flying drones in that area. So the more layers of detection you have, the more you create that deterrence before you even have to resort to mitigation. And ultimately, deterrence will probably be the first step of any mitigation approach, right? Shooting down a drone is a last resort because there's always some risk of collateral damage. But having that mitigation is helpful, but deterrence is where most people will need to start, and oftentimes could maybe even solve a lot of the problems with drones.
I will say,
in some of
Josh,
these areas.
On that note, a lot of the federal agencies that I talk with that have mitigation capability have told me that to your point, it is the last resort to, so to speak, hit that red button and bring the drone down. That it's actually very rare that it happens, even with those sites that have mitigation already available, because again, they're able to, work through other forms of detection and deterrence and talking to the pilot and educating people and, kind of limiting the collateral. And so I find that to be fascinating because a lot of folks are like, give me mitigation ability today. We need it. But the folks that actually have it today hardly use it. Maybe we need to just learn more about it, refine the equipment, refine the technology. In fact, there was a test in San Diego recently with Interpol, and I wasn't there myself, but I've heard that there were mixed results across a lot of the most kind of the biggest mitigation technologies in the commercial market right now. There were always issues. There were always things that came up with signal and other things that made it so maybe the drone would get stopped, but then it wouldn't be able to go to the place they wanted it to. It would mess it up, and it would hover and do something weird and then drop into the water, and then they had to go get a diver to go pick it up for the next test and make sure it's still working. Where the goal was, maybe cyber, RF cyber or whatever, take it over and put it over here so that it's safe. So even some of our most refined systems today that are available for commercial aren't quite commercially ready. Then we need more opportunity to actually get out there and try them, test them, refine them, make them better, make them more affordable, etc. So anyway, with that said, I will also add to your point, Josh, that even having detection, once you put it in, you do need to integrate that into the rest of your process, right? You need to know, what are you going to do when you detect it? Who's going to respond to that? Where's that information going to go? Because put it up at 6 airports today, all of a sudden you're going to see drones at 6 airports today. How are we going to, we need to kind of mature and manage that appropriately and be ready for that uptick in sightings the minute you put in detection equipment. New Jersey was actually even like the next stage. They had detection and they put out a QR code for people to submit incidences. Like the average citizen could hit that QR code and say, I see a drone at this location doing XYZ, submit. And that's actually really part of why that escalated, because then they published that, they promoted that, like, hey, use this, see something, say something. And then suddenly, 10, 15, 20 people are seeing something, saying something that when 0 were saying anything before. Now there's 20 drones. What are they doing? And then the news picks that up. And now everybody, jumps. And now there's hundreds. And now there's like hundreds upon hundreds, And so I think the point is these are baby steps. And we've got to continue slowly but surely progressing this industry and practicing and putting things into place, putting detection into place, putting in reporting systems, testing mitigation in the appropriate settings, because in a year, 2 years, 3 years, we need to be in a pretty mature state for, protecting ourselves. Right. So,
anyway, I think,
go ahead.
DJ Smith always says, our good friend of the podcast, it's education. He's always hammering that. But I think that's true, because I was just while we were talking, doing a little bit more research into those sightings. And it said in the news articles, and again, who knows, maybe these were picked up by American or, military grade detection equipment that could just see that they were Russian. Who knows, right? We're just speculating based off of limited information, but it sounded like they just saw some drones flying, and they're like in multiple places. They just said, hey, there's a drone flying. They shut down the whole airport. And it sounds like, there were some recently Russian drones violating airspace in Poland or things like that. So it kind of spooked them. They just started noticing the drones more. So they started shutting down the airports. And it didn't sound like it was necessarily even the same drone. It was just dispersed drone sightings at these different airports that sent them the lockdown. So you can see that it's just, until you have that, like we talked about earlier, that low level awareness of what's in the airspace, you can actually track and see who the good guys and bad guys are. It's going to be very difficult to secure these sites like the airports, and then also you're going to be shutting down your airport for some kids who are flying their drones for fun, and that's not going to be very sustainable. So I'm glad that they're starting to take drone security more seriously and getting detection equipment. It'll be interesting to see if they keep on having sightings there in Denmark. But also it just goes back to like you said about mitigation. In my opinion, I don't think that mitigation will be allowed unless you do have that detection, low-level detection of that layered, be able to see the RF, remote ID, radar and things like that. So that way you're not just mitigating every drone you see in the sky. The first step towards mitigation is detection. So I think a lot of folks who have that viewpoint are starting to, build out their detection. But in the meantime, I see a lot of people who are excited about mitigation, but aren't that excited about detection, but they really go hand in hand. You're not going to be able to start mitigating things until you know what's up there.
Totally. And so I will say, before we transition here to talk more about upcoming events, to your point, that detection and then reporting it actually becomes the first layer of deterrence. It actually works as a deterrent. When folks realize, wait, I'm going to get caught if I'm doing this and someone's going to approach me, it does make people think twice, and it reduces the number of drones. And we've seen that in statewide deployments with radar systems at prisons, at correctional facilities, where we're starting to detect and track large cartel-backed network-backed drone delivery systems, right, where drones are coming in constantly in states like Ohio and others, where we've been able to mass deploy, and that the ability to detect and start to get in front of that contraband and limit it has helped to become a true deterrent, where we've received stats and reports showing, wow, we've had this many less, like a drastic reduction in drones delivering contraband in our state now that we've widely deployed these detection systems. So it really is effective. Let's transition. And we're, by the way, everybody, we have a shorter session today. We're going to go for another 10 minutes or so till 1:30 Eastern. And so but I did want to bring up a couple upcoming events. And if any of you out there are going to events this week, next week, in the near future, and you want to meet up in person, feel free to put those in the comments as well, so we can all keep these conversations going when we see each other in person. But myself, I'm going next week. I'm pretty excited to join Bill Edwards and his team for a week-long counter UAS, whole in-depth, what do you call it? Yeah, just like a hands-on workshop for some major key players down in Florida. And there's a special focus on the World Cup coming to that area. And so, yeah, pretty excited there. I'm going to talk radars. I'm going to talk layer detection, everything we've been discussing today with, and I can't list exactly who's going to be there, but it's some pretty major players. And so thanks, Bill, for what you're doing, for inviting us down there. And I'm excited to be part of that. If you guys are in the Miami area, come Monday, Tuesday, I'd love to sync up, or Tuesday, Wednesday. Love to say hi and meet up with you in person if we can. Josh, I think you're going elsewhere, maybe down to Nolens, if I'm not mistaken, next week. Tell me about that.
Going to be at GSX next week. Definitely very excited to be there and talking with some of the security integrators. I know that there's been, like we've been talking about, a lot of need for layer detection at facilities like critical infrastructure, around airports and things like that. So excited to get down there and to see how we can help people, create safer spaces through layer detection.
Awesome. Well, with that, a special announcement that I alluded to earlier in the episode. is, and I'll let you share this, Josh, but where are you going to be? Where can people find you at GSX? Are you going to be in any particular booth there for any particular reason?
Yeah, I'm going to be at the Echodyne booth. I just recently got brought on to be doing what David's doing, but just in the West. So very excited to be able to go and be partners together and make our airspace safer. Right, you've been doing a great job of that in the East, and I'm excited to come and just make a safer, more aware airspace in the West. It's going to be very exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, with that said, if you guys didn't quite catch that, Josh is now officially part of the Echodyne team. And so you'll be seeing him there. Go say hi to him and show him some love there at GSX booth. I believe it's, let me see, 419. So come say hi. Let's keep making this airspace safer. We need it. And it's, only a matter of time before people continue to leverage drones for nefarious uses. We need to be able to be in front of that. But it's also exciting, in summary here, of what we talked about. It's also exciting to see the FAA putting out this Part 108 BVLOS Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. They're going to establish a new set of rules so that we can more easily scale and automate large fleets of drones to do things like delivery, your Google and Amazon and, Walmart delivery scenarios that we've all kind of talked about and dreamed about. So this will help create that infrastructure. But again, October 6th, the deadline to comment. The way it's currently written, it doesn't necessarily account for every one of your applications out there, those using drones right now for medical delivery or for law enforcement, drone as first responder. So make sure to spend some time reading through it yourself or with your organization and, making those comments, because the FAA needs our comments out in the industry. This is our chance. This is our time. And I will say, when you submit a comment to the FAA, as I've been told by brilliant minds here on the podcast that I try to listen to their advice, they've said, try not to just say, hey, thumbs up, I really like that, or this is terrible, you should take this out, but instead give very specific economic impacts, good or bad, be able to say, wow, I really appreciate how the NPRM says X, Y, and Z. That's going to help scale what I'm doing 10x, and it's going to be a major positive impact to the economic growth of this industry, this company. The employees will be able to hire on and on and on. Good job. We like that. And on the flip side, hey, the way this is worded, that severely limits and handicaps what we're already doing and seeing, and that's going to reduce the number of flights and the number of employees and have this negative impact that we can measure and determine and submit to you. That's the first part. Second part is then offer, if you're offering critique, offer specific wording to change that, to say, well, if it were worded this way, here's a template example, or if you inserted maybe an option for XYZ, here's what that could sound like. Then, they've got a true business case from you, and then also a template to be able to somewhat copy paste if they would choose to, and tweak your wording as well. So some food for thought. And otherwise, guys, we're keeping it short and sweet today. Josh, I guess this is day one with Echodyne, so he's got plenty to do to onboard and get ready to go next week to GSX. Otherwise, everyone, we will see you soon. And I guess next week live, same time, same place, this week in drones. Thanks for your attention. We'll talk to you soon.